Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, October 7, 2025. A White House memo says that 750,000 federal government employees furloughed during the government shutdown are not necessarily entitled to back pay when the government reopens. And the shutdown, now 7 days old, shows no signs of ending soon as the Senate continues voting on the same Republican and Democratic proposals, and neither one getting enough votes to pass. President Donald Trump meets the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney at the White House to talk about trade and tariffs. Attorney General Pam Bondi testifies before the Senate Judiciary Committee, pointing to a report this week that the FBI, as part of its investigation of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, tracked Republican lawmakers' private phone records. Attorney General Bondi also having tense exchanges with Democratic senators on the committee over everything from the Epstein files to a dropped ethics case against Border Czar Tom Homan and the indictment of former FBI Director James Comey. Supreme Court hears a case challenging a Colorado law that bans conversion therapy for LGBTQ minors. At issue is whether the law is a proper state regulation of a medical treatment or an unconstitutional limit on free speech by the therapist. And today is the 2-year anniversary of Hamas's attack on Israel, October 7, 2023. Washington Post writes that furloughed federal workers are not entitled to automatic back pay after the government shutdown ends. The Trump administration's budget office claimed in a new draft memo obtained by the Washington Post, ratcheting up tensions in Washington over the week-long closure. The top lawyer at the White House Office of Management and Budget argued in the draft that the law Congress passed and President Trump signed in 2019 that guaranteed back pay to furloughed workers does no such thing. The General Counsel wrote to the White House Budget Director Russell Vought that the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act of 2019 and subsequent legislation merely create conditions for Congress to authorize those payments. Lawmakers must also specifically set aside additional money to compensate workers returning from furlough, he wrote. That was from the Washington Post. President Donald Trump questioned about this during his meeting in the White House Oval Office with the visiting Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney.
Is it the White House's position that furloughed workers should be paid for their back pay?
I would say it depends on who we're talking about. I can tell you this, the Democrats have put a lot of people in great risk and jeopardy, but it really depends on who you're talking about. But for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. There are some people that really don't deserve to be taken care of, and we'll take care of them in a different way. Okay? Thank you.
President Donald Trump was later asked in this Oval Office news conference to clarify.
Mr. President, why do you say some federal workers should not get their back pay? Why do you say some?
Well, you're going to have to figure that out, okay? Ask the Democrats that question.
Mr. President,
Go ahead.
Mr. President, just to follow up there, I mean, the law says that when the government is reopened, that workers will receive their back pay. So are you going to define the law there, or what do you?
I follow the law, and what the law says is correct, and I follow the law. I always
President Donald Trump with reporters in the White House Oval Office. He also said he knows which federal programs he wants to eliminate permanently during the shutdown. He said we'll be announcing it pretty soon. Asked how many federal jobs will be cut permanently. He said I'll be able to tell you that in 4 or 5 days if this keeps going on. And he said a lot of those jobs will never come back. He also called the Democratic Party's position on the government shutdown like a kamikaze attack, saying they almost, have nothing to lose. More from the Washington Post article about the dispute over whether federal employees on furlough will get back pay when the government reopens. Roughly 750,000 employees have been furloughed during the shutdown, according to congressional bookkeepers, policymakers, including leading appropriators in Congress. And House Speaker Mike Johnson had generally interpreted the law in a more straightforward fashion, that new legislation to fund agencies would also automatically pay the government's employees, whether furloughed or working without pay. Speaker Johnson spoke about this at a news conference today.
With regard to whether the furloughed civilian employees of the federal government will receive back pay, it is true that in previous shutdowns, many or most of them have been paid for the time that they were furloughed. But there is new legal analysis. I don't know the details. I just saw a headline this morning. I'm not read in on it, and I haven't spoken to the White House about it. But there are some legal analysts who are saying that that may not be appropriate or necessary in terms of the law requiring that back pay be provided. So I'm sure that'll be there will be a lot of discussion about that. But there are legal analysts who think that that is not something that government should do. That, if that is true, that should turn up the urgency and the necessity of the Democrats doing the right thing here. Even more pain, more than I just listed, for more people. So we've got to figure it out.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, held a news conference as well on the federal government shutdown and had this to say about the issue of federal worker back pay.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I just want to get your take on this memo that's circulating in the White House that seems to suggest that furloughed workers may not get back pay. What is your reaction to that guidance? And is it your expectation that some type of language to ensure back pay will be included in any final CR or bill once this shutdown is resolved?
Donald Trump and his administration have been torturing federal employees since the very beginning of his presidency, engaging in mass firings, harassing them, brutalizing them, laying people off without justification, and violating the law. So let me be clear to those hardworking federal employees who are now being victimized by this Trump Republican shutdown. We continue to stand with you, and will stand with you as we've done from the very beginning of this presidency. And the law is clear. Every single furloughed federal employee is entitled to back pay. Period, full stop. The law is clear, and we will make sure that that law is followed.
U.S. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, at today's news conference on Capitol Hill. This is Washington Today. CNN writing about the news conference. Congressman Jeffries has batted down several ideas floated by rank-and-file Republicans about how to potentially end a stalemate over enhanced American Care Act subsidies and end the shutdown. One of those ideas is a one-year extension of the subsidies, floated by GOP Senator Mike Rounds. Jeffries said a one-year extension of Affordable Care Act subsidies is not acceptable. It's a non-starter. That was from CNN. U.S. Senate has been voting on Republican and Democratic proposals to reopen the government and the shutdown. So far, 5 different votes on this, and each time both proposals have failed to reach the 60 votes needed to advance. That's the threshold that requires bipartisan support because Republicans have 53 seats. Democratic caucus has 47 seats. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, spoke Tuesday morning on the Senate floor.
Mr. President, it's been 1 week since Democrats shut down the government. 1 week since Democrats put their far-left base before the American people. Over the past week, the Senate has taken votes on 2 different continuing resolutions. One, offered by Republicans, is a clean funding extension, something that we do routinely around here. It adds no Republican policies. It has no partisan policy riders. It just extends current funding levels through November the 21st so that we can make more progress on full-year appropriations. The Democrats' proposal, on the other hand, shows their lack of seriousness. Their resolution would fund the government until October 31st in exchange for $1.5 trillion in new partisan spending. Yes, you heard that right, Mr. President. $1.5 trillion in new partisan spending to fund the government through the end of the month. Just the end of the month. 4 weeks for $1.5 trillion. And then there's the fact that their plan makes non-citizens eligible for federal health care programs, strips away common sense work requirements for able-bodied adults to be eligible for Medicaid, and repeals the transformative $50 billion rural health fund that Republicans enacted in July to support and bolster rural hospitals. Why Democrats think that threatening health care in rural America is a winning proposition is beyond me. But apparently, they really do think so because we're still in the shutdown 1 week later. And Democrats are digging in their heels on their partisan demands.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, today on the Senate floor. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, said his side, too, will be holding firm on their requirement that enhanced Obamacare insurance tax subsidies be extended and Medicaid funding cuts in the Republican tax cut and spending cut law, the one big beautiful bill, be restored.
Yesterday, for the fifth time, the Republican CR failed to secure enough votes to pass this chamber. After 5 failed votes, Republicans should understand they cannot go forward unless we come to a bipartisan agreement to address the health care crisis facing America. The shutdown has now lasted almost a week, the Trump-caused shutdown, and Republicans are still in the no negotiation, our way or the highway mode. And President Trump, meanwhile, is not taking this shutdown seriously. Listen to this. Instead of fixing health care, instead of reopening the government, Donald Trump seems more interested in sending money to other countries instead of focusing on the problems here at home. His administration is in negotiation right now to send a $20 billion bailout to Argentina, right in the middle of a government shutdown. You got to be kidding. Does the administration really want us to believe there's not enough money for air traffic controllers, not enough money to fix the ACA healthcare premiums, but there somehow is $20 billion available to bail out Argentina because Trump likes the government's leader there? Give me a break. It shows you that this administration and Republicans are not serious enough when it comes to people's health care and when it comes to ending their shutdown.
The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor. Fox News summing it up. The Senate remains deadlocked on a path to end the shutdown as it nears its second week, and Republicans' meager support across the aisle to reopen the government may be crumbling. Majority Leader John Thune needs at least 8 Senate Democratic caucus members to join Republicans to reopen the government, given that Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, has consistently voted against the GOP's bill. So far, a trio of Democratic caucus members have crossed the aisle to reopen the government: John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, and Angus King, independent, from Maine. That's reporting from Fox News. And from Politico, Speaker Mike Johnson said the House could come back to pass legislation to pay troops during the government shutdown. Senate Majority Leader John Thune wasn't willing to go there. The unusual technical disagreement between the two top congressional leaders played out in front of cameras Tuesday on Capitol Hill as the shutdown heads into its second week. House has been out of session as Johnson seeks to pressure Senate Democrats to approve the GOP-led stopgap funding bill his chamber already passed. But he opened the door at a Tuesday news conference to calling members back to vote on standalone legislation paying troops who could miss paychecks on October 15th, or air traffic controllers who could miss their first checks Friday. That was from Politico. Wall Street today, the Dow down 91, NASDAQ down 153, S&P down 25. Associated Press writes that gold futures have soared above $4,000 per troy ounce for the first time, as many investors seek a safe place to park their money as the U.S. government shutdown continues. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney begins a political article, won praise from President Donald Trump in the Oval Office Tuesday, avoiding blow-ups or embarrassment, even though he fell short of a breakthrough in the trade standoff between the two North American neighbors. We've come a long way over the last few months, actually, in terms of that relationship, Trump declared, adding that he considered Carney a world-class leader and a tough negotiator. I think they're going to walk away very happy. We have great love for each other, Trump told Carney after the Prime Minister lauded Trump's peace efforts around the world, including the Middle East. But the president added, we have a natural conflict. That was from Politico. During the news conference, each leader got a question about the state of trade between the U.S. and Canada, first to President Trump.
Why has Canada and the United States failed to reach an agreement up until now?
Well, it's a complicated agreement, more complicated maybe than any other agreement we have on trade, because, we have natural conflict. We also have mutual love. We have great love for each other. I love this. I love Canada and the people of Canada. And Mark feels the same way about here. The problem we have is that they want a car company and I want a car company, meaning the U.S. wants a car company. And they want steel and we want steel. So in other countries, they're very far away. And there's no problem. You can compete and you can do. We don't like to compete because we sort of hurt each other when we compete. And so we have a natural conflict. It's a natural business conflict. Nothing wrong with it. And I think we've come a long way over the last few months, actually, in terms of that relationship. So when it comes to trade, the United States was always giving everything. They gave everything to Canada. They would let car companies leave here and go to Canada. But that hurts the United States. And, other presidents didn't see that. They weren't business-oriented. They might have been good politicians in some cases, not in all cases. They were bad at both. But it's a very natural conflict, and it's something that we're working out.
Canada has offered a lot of compromise this summer. Are you willing today to offer some compromise to Canada, maybe on steel, on aluminum?
Well, we've made compromise, and we've made some compromise even on steel. But, we have the same basic authority and the same basic, this could be also a little bit of a conflict with other countries all over the world on steel, because we want to make our own steel. We don't want to bring steel in for the most part, but we will bring it in, and we do bring it in. We continue to bring it in from Canada, but there is a tariff to pay. And I think that would be a normal thing to say, but we've come a long way. I think, Howard, we can truly say. Do you want to make a comment on that?
Well, I think the opportunity to work together, but as you said, there's conflict. Why do we make cars in Canada? You've called that out, and you've addressed that. So there are places we should work together, and there are places that we have natural conflict.
It's a tough situation because we want to make our cars here. At the same time, we want Canada to do well making cars. So we're working on formulas, and I think we'll get there.
President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office. You also heard from the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Sitting beside the president, the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who was also asked about tariffs and trade.
Mr. Prime Minister, I'd like to know how come the UK and the European Union have succeeded to sign deals and bring the tariffs down, and Canada still hasn't been able to do the same?
Yeah, because they're not located right next to each other. It makes it, in many cases, it's much better and easier. But
yeah, if I may, let's be clear about the relationship as it stands right now. We are the second largest trading partner of the United States. We do a lot of trade going across the border where we're cooperating, first thing. Secondly, we are the largest foreign investor in the United States. $500 billion in the last 5 years alone, probably $8 trillion in the next 5 years if we get the agreement that we expect to get. Thirdly, there are areas, as the President just said, where conflict, maybe not so much conflict, we compete. There are areas where we compete, and it's in those areas where we have to come to an agreement that works. But there are more areas where we are stronger together, and that's what we're focused on. And we're going to get the right deal for America, right deal, obviously, from my perspective, for Canada.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney with President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office today. Returning to the Politico article about this visit, Carney is facing domestic pressure to push Trump to lift or reduce levies of 50% on steel and aluminum imports, as well as additional tariffs on some auto, softwood lumber, and copper. Canada's 25% counter tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum remain. Ontario Premier Doug Ford said Tuesday if Carney can't forge a deal with Trump soon, it's time to bring back more retaliatory tariffs. That was from Politico. This is Washington Today. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi testified today before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and when it was over, New York Times Justice Department correspondent Devlin Barrett wrote, "The Senate hearing with Attorney General Pam Bondi has ended after nearly 4 hours of angry, accusatory exchanges with lawmakers in which the nation's top law enforcement official repeatedly tried to deflect any question about whether the Trump administration is manipulating or mishandling politically sensitive cases with a variety of accusations against Democrats." Again, that was from the New York Times. During her opening statement, Attorney General Bondi spoke about an unclassified document released by Judiciary Committee Chair Chuck Grassley on Monday that she says showed the FBI analyzed the personal cell phone data of 9 congressional Republicans as part of its investigation into the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol building.
When I was confirmed as the 87th Attorney General of the United States, I took office with 2 main goals: to end the weaponization of justice and return the department to its core mission of fighting violent crime. As to ending the weaponization of justice, we learned that former FBI secretly investigated you and your colleagues. Why? They wanted to take President Trump off the playing field. They were playing politics with law enforcement powers and will go down as a historic betrayal of public trust. This is the kind of conduct that shatters the American people's faith in our law enforcement system. We will work to earn that back every single day. We are returning to our core mission of fighting real crime. While there is more work to do, I believe in 8 short months, we have made tremendous progress towards those ends.
Attorney General Pam Bondi, part of her opening statement at today's Judiciary Committee hearing. President Trump posting today on Truth Social, deranged Jack Smith got caught with his hand in the cookie jar, a real sleaze bag. And an NBC News article explains that FBI's Arctic Frost investigation was a precursor of Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into efforts by President Donald Trump and his allies to overturn the 2020 election results. During today's hearing, Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, called for a special prosecutor to investigate that and other cases he says shows the Biden administration Justice Department targeted American citizens unfairly. Attorney General Bondi clashed with nearly every Democratic senator on the committee, and near the end of the hearing, Senator Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, asked her about all the questions that he says she never answered.
I think it's valuable that the American people get a sense of what you've refused to answer today. So these are just some of the questions you refused to answer, or have answered with personal attacks on members of this committee. You were asked whether you consulted with career ethics lawyers, as you promised you would do during your nomination hearing, when you approved the president receiving a $400 million gift from the Qataris. You refused to answer that question. You were asked who or what role you may have played, or who played the role in asking that Trump's name be flagged in any of the Epstein documents gathered by the FBI. You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether Homan kept the $50,000 bribe money. You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether Homan paid taxes on the $50,000 bribe money. You refused to answer that question. You were asked, did career prosecutors find insufficient evidence to charge James Comey? You refused to answer that question. You were asked, how are military strikes on these boats in the Caribbean legal? And you refused to even answer that question.
You were asked, a law degree,
excuse me. You were asked, did you discuss indicting James Comey with the president? You refused to answer that question. You were asked, did you approve the firing of antitrust lawyers who disagreed with the Hewlett-Packard merger? You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether you support a restoration fund for violent insurrections to attack the Capitol on January 6th. You refused to answer that question. You were asked whether you were firing career professionals, career prosecutors, just because they worked on January 6th investigations. You refused to answer that question. You were asked by my California colleague whether you believe government officials, like immigration officials, have to abide by court orders. You wouldn't even answer that question. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing.
Oversight?
Excuse me, you can attack me after my time is over.
You've attacked all of us, including President Trump, for your entire career.
You can attack me later, and I know you've got plenty of canned attacks. We've heard them all day to day.
Canned attacks on you?
This is supposed to be—
No one needs a canned attack on you.
Regular order, Madam Chair. I'm trying to speak. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing of the Justice Department. And it comes in the wake of an indictment called for by the president of one of his enemies. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing, and it comes in the wake of revelations that a top administration official took $50,000 in a bag, and this department made that investigation go away. This is supposed to be an oversight hearing when dozens of prosecutors have been fired simply because they worked on cases investigating the former president. This is, and now the current president.
What about the fires in California? Do you care about that, Senator Schiff?
This is supposed to be an oversight hearing in which members of Congress can get serious answers to serious questions about
the riots in LA serious?
About the cover-up of corruption, about the prosecution of the president's enemies. And
I think you owe the president an apology.
When will it be
Your entire career,
that the
frankly.
members of this committee on a bipartisan basis demand answers to those questions and refuse to accept
Clearly you're a failed lawyer
refuse
because
to
you don't
accept,
understand when someone can and cannot
refuse
answer
to
a
accept
question.
personal slander as an answer to those questions.
Personal slander.
With
Will
that,
you
Madam
apologize
Chair,
to Donald
I yield
Trump
back.
for slandering him? Personal slander.
Attorney General Pam Bondi testifying before the Judiciary Committee today. Those questions from Senator Adam Schiff, Democrat from California. During the hearing, the Attorney General also defended the Trump administration's moves to send federal law enforcement, and in some cases National Guard troops, to large U.S. cities led by Democratic mayors to combat crime and assist federal immigration enforcement. Here are some questions from Senator Mike Lee, Republican from Utah.
Now, in recent months, going along with this law enforcement effort, there's been a disturbing trend. It's a disturbing trend that seems to be on the increase in recent days and weeks. That is a rise of violence directed at federal law enforcement officers engaged in immigration-related arrests, including direct physical threats, organized riots outside of detention facilities, and most tragically, of late, a fatal shooting targeting an ICE facility in Dallas. Then just yesterday, it was reported that a cartel member in Chicago put a bounty, that's right, a bounty, out there offering $2,000 on information about any ICE officer and $10,000 for those who kill an ICE officer. Now, keep in mind, this information is not for kicks and giggles. It is not for a game of Trivial Pursuit. That information, for which the cartel member would pay $2,000, is there so that others can kill an ICE officer and get $10,000. That's what that is. Can you discuss what protections are essential to ensuring the safety of ICE officers and their families, and why requirements to display personal information and prohibiting them from ever wearing any kind of covering would represent a totally unacceptable, indefensible risk to their public safety?
Senator Lee, our federal agents have been doxxed, and many of you know what that means. It has happened to you on both sides of the aisle. Our federal agents' lives have been threatened. We spoke with Apple and Google to get the ICE Block app taken down. That was reckless and criminal in that people were posting where ICE officers lived. We worked with both Apple and Google to take that down.
It's stunning, I would add here, that it took as much work as it did by you to get them to take that down. Remember, in the days following January 6th, they took down all kinds of things, including a social media app called Parler, based on very thin evidence that was later largely rebutted, suggesting that people had been manipulating Parler in order to plan the January 6th attack. That wasn't true, and they took it down. I'm glad they have taken this Block ICE app down, but it's a shame that it took as long as it did, and as much work on your part to get them to take it down.
I will tell you they were cooperative, and to correct myself, it was where they were going, the jobs they were doing. And that's what's been happening, because hundreds of organized rioters, Senator Lee, are showing up where our ICE officers are. And as you know, they have fireworks, they have gas masks. You know, they don't want our officers to be protected with their identity, yet they're wearing gas masks, they're wearing goggles, and they're
So it's okay
ramming
for them to be safe. It's okay for Antifa to be safe. It's okay for those doing the bidding of international violent drug cartels to be safe. But heaven forbid our ICE officers should be safe.
Thank you, Senator Lee.
Senator Mike Lee is a Republican from Utah, questioning Attorney General Pam Bondi at today's Judiciary Committee hearing. You can find the full 4-hour hearing at our video library at cspan.org. FBI Director Kash Patel posting on X today, Chicago will be saved, and this FBI will continue to crush violent crime there and all around the country, heading to the Windy City now. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, a Democrat, asked about this post and also about the National Guard deployment to his city at a news conference in Chicago.
As you probably are well aware, FBI Director Kash Patel has tweeted out that he's on his way to Chicago now to save Chicago. Could we get your thoughts on that? And if you could also just brief us on the latest that you know about where the National Guard is and where they may be warming up.
Well, Cash has come in here to really enjoy the city of Chicago and spend money, and I strongly encourage him to spend as much as he possibly can. The city of Chicago has been voted yet again the best big city in America, and he gets to get a front row seat to experience that himself. Our economy continues to grow despite the cuts that the Trump administration is putting forward. As far as what we are hearing, the National Guard, first of all, it's illegal, unconstitutional, it's dangerous, it's wrong. This is not about deportation. This is not about safety for this president. This is about authoritarianism. It's about stoking fear. It's about breaking the Constitution that would give him that much more control over our American cities. We have not heard directly, of course, from the president or his administration. And, my expectation is that regardless of, what this administration is doing, I'm going to remain firm and committed in protecting the rights and the civility of our nation, and we'll start right here in Chicago.
Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, a Democrat, news conference in Chicago. Chicago Sun-Times reporting today after weeks of threats from President Donald Trump to deploy military troops into Illinois over the vehement objections of Governor J.B. Pritzker and other Democratic leaders. Texas National Guard members arrived early Tuesday at a southwest suburban military training site ahead of an operation to protect federal immigration agents and facilities. The troops showed up a day after a federal judge rejected a request from Pritzker and Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul to immediately bar the deployment. A hearing on the temporary restraining order sought by Illinois leaders was scheduled for Thursday. During a White House briefing, Trump said he was still considering invoking the Insurrection Act to deploy troops, a move that could bypass the court fight being waged by Pritzker and Raoul. That was from the Chicago Sun-Times. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Premiering this Friday at 7 p.m. on C-SPAN, Vice President Mike Pence and Obama White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel, once colleagues in Congress, sit down together for this episode of Ceasefire, hosted by Politico's White House Bureau Chief Dasha Burns. Ceasefire, bridging the divide in American politics, where the shouting stops and the conversation begins. Two leaders, one goal, to find common ground, only on C-SPAN.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Supreme Court's conservative majority on Tuesday, writes the New York Times, seemed poised to rule for a Christian therapist who says her free speech rights are violated by a Colorado law barring mental health professionals from seeking to change a teenager's sexual orientation or gender identity. In a lively argument, which lasted an hour and a half, the justices debated whether the so-called conversion therapy covered by Colorado's law causes harm to minors. Lawyers for the therapist and the Trump administration said there were no studies indicating such therapy causes harm. The state's lawyer countered that there is a mountain of evidence that conversion therapy is ineffective and harmful. Reporting from the New York Times, the case is Childs v. Salazar, brought by Kaylee Childs, a licensed professional counselor in Colorado. Her attorney, James Campbell, went first in oral argument. These were some of the questions from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
The argument that the 10th Circuit seemed to find persuasive was that if you are in the world of medical treatment, you are regulating conduct, that the medical treatment itself is an activity that is being licensed and that is being performed, and that it really isn't speech, that speech is the tool that is being used, just like in other medical treatments. You have scalpels, you have tools that medical professionals use to accomplish certain goals and to provide treatment. And so in that sense, I think their argument was that speech is incidental to the provision of this medical treatment. So I guess we need to understand whether her therapy qualifies as medical treatment.
The question is whether her speech is incidental to conduct. That's what the court said in NIFLA. It said that if there's professional conduct, then speech that's incidental to that could be regulated.
So treatment is not conduct in your view, medical treatment.
If the treatment consists only of speech, then it doesn't trigger the speech incidental to conduct doctrine. And here we're just in First Amendment land where there is full, robust protection. That's why I answered the Chief Justice's questions differently and acknowledged that if there was conduct in the practice of medicine going on, it changes the analysis.
I guess it seems very odd that you could have two scenarios where you have two licensed professionals both attempting to provide treatment to an individual, say for the same issue, that, you know, the person says, I'd like to live consistently with my biological sex. I feel that I'm not doing that. I'd like your help. Medical professional A treats that quote-unquote condition with medication. Medical professional B treats that condition with talk therapy. And I guess under your theory, those two scenarios are sufficiently different from a constitutional perspective that one could be allowed and the other not.
I think that's potentially correct because the First Amendment would apply to the speech.
Just because therapy. Words are being used to accomplish the therapy in one scenario and not the other.
No, because only words are being used in the one scenario. Again, if there is a combination of words and conduct, I think that takes us into a different realm. But one of the things that's so problematic about Colorado's law is that it undermines the well-being of kids that are struggling with gender dysphoria. And so Colorado accepts that up to 90% of kids who struggle with that before puberty will work their way through it and realign their identity with their sex. But this law says that if any of those children go to a licensed professional and say, I would like help realigning my identity with my sex, that licensed professional has to decline to help them.
Attorney James Campbell questioned by Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson in the oral argument in today's case challenging the Colorado law banning conversion therapy. Arguing on behalf of Colorado, the state Solicitor General Shannon Stevenson. This question from Chief Justice John Roberts.
Counsel, you said, just because they're using words, but our cases separate those out. Holder, NIFLA, in other words, just because they're engaged in conduct doesn't mean that their words aren't protected.
So, Chief Justice, our case is absolutely premised on the notion that communications that are happening in the very specific context of treatment, which I will call a licensed professional delivering clinical care to an individual patient, where they are subject to fiduciary duties and subject to malpractice, that is fundamentally different, a fundamentally different regulation than a regulation of people out in the world going about their business, like at issue in Holder, where you have generally applicable statutes that apply to everyone. This is just a fundamentally different relationship. It has always been treated like that. In NIFLA, the court talked about the fact that longstanding torts for malpractice did not implicate heightened First Amendment scrutiny, and I think that analysis is exactly the same here. Malpractice, you're dealing with that same individualized relationship, and this is the exact same context.
Colorado Solicitor General Shannon Stevenson questioned by Chief Justice of the United States John Roberts at today's oral argument in the case challenging Colorado's conversion therapy ban for LGBTQ minors. Justice Samuel Alito asked General Stevenson about whether medical consensus might be politicized, and he cited eugenics as an example.
Your argument depends very heavily on the standard of care, which I take it is defined by a medical consensus. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Have there been occasions, the medical consensus is usually very reasonable and it's very important, but have there been times when the medical consensus has been politicized, has been taken over by ideology?
We have no facts about that in this case, but I wouldn't disagree that that's possible. And I think it's a really...
Isn't it a fact that it's happened in the past?
I think
Three generations of idiots are enough?
I think that's certainly a concern, and if there were evidence of that in the record as to whether or not there were a standard of care that wasn't really based on patient safety, that would be highly relevant evidence.
Well, isn't that a reason to apply First Amendment scrutiny when what is being regulated is pure speech and not just saying medical standard of care or medical consensus? That's the end of the day. Rational basis review, anything goes.
No, Your Honor, because again, when we're talking about words used to deliver medical treatment, those issues are the same whether you're talking about words being used or whether you're talking about medical practices that don't involve words. Those issues are the exact same. And there is nothing about this statute, for example, that stops anyone from sharing any opinion about conversion therapy or about how the consensus on that was reached. And again, in this case, there is just no evidence of any motive by either the Colorado legislature or any medical association to reach this conclusion on anything based on anything other than protection of minors and a decades-long record of research.
Was there a time when many medical professionals thought that certain people should not be permitted to procreate because they had low IQs?
I don't know that, but I will accept the premise.
I mean, was there a time when there were many medical professionals who thought that every child born with Down syndrome should be immediately put in an institution?
I don't know that, Your Honor.
Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito questioning Colorado Solicitor General Shannon Stevenson, part of the oral argument heard today in the case Childs v. Salazar about Colorado's anti-conversion therapy law. CNN writing about the case, a majority of the Supreme Court signaled Tuesday it is prepared to rule against Colorado's ban on conversion therapy for minors, with several justices signaling they agree with a licensed counselor in the state who says the law violates her First Amendment rights. And also on the potential impact, roughly half of U.S. states have banned the therapy for minors, Colorado officials told the Supreme Court. That was from CNN. You can find the full oral argument, runs about an hour and a half, at our website, cspan.org. This is Washington Today. From AP, thousands of people gathered in southern Israel to mourn the dead as the nation marked 2 years since Hamas's October 7th attack plunged the region into a devastating war, while Israel and Hamas hold indirect talks in Egypt. That was from AP. Hamas attackers in 2023 killed 1,200 people, took 251 people hostage, 48 hostages still in captivity, less than half of those believed to be still alive. Gaza health officials say that the Israeli military offensive in Gaza following Hamas's attack has now killed 67,000 people. In Washington, D.C., Congressman Josh Gottmeier, Democrat from New Jersey, led a news conference to mark the anniversary.
It's hard to believe that it's been 2 years since Hamas terrorists brutally raped, burned alive, decapitated, and murdered more than 1,200 innocent babies, children, women and men, and elderly, including dozens of Americans. The deadliest attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. 913 IDF soldiers lost since then, 18 minors left orphaned, 48 still remain hostage in Gaza, as I mentioned, including 2 Americans. It's hard to wrap your head around, but as Scripture tells us, you shall not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood. We will not sit idly by, and we have not sat idly by since the 7th. We will do as we've done every day since. We will keep working until every last hostage is freed.
Congressman Josh Gottheimer, Democrat from New Jersey, at a news conference outside the U.S. Capitol building in Washington. He also said he is introducing several bipartisan bills, one condemning Hamas's attack from 2 years ago today, another awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to American hostages and victims of Hamas's attack, and another bill promoting education about the attack and anti-Semitism.
We will fight to honor their memory and so many others by molding our pain from that tragic day into action and ensuring that American children know their heroism and the savagery of Hamas terrorists. Only by ensuring that true facts, not some social media cooked up fiction, by ensuring they know those facts, we know that it'll never happen again, like the Shoah.
Congressman Josh Gottheimer at a news conference. Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, spoke today on the Senate floor about the anniversary of Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel.
Mr. President, today is October the 7th, 2025. It's been 731 days, 2 years that the war has been raging in Israel. October the 7th, 2023, Hamas terrorists stormed through a fence line separating Gaza and Israel. And early that morning, they brutally slaughtered over 1,200 people, men, women, children, moms and dads, grandparents. There were 4,000 plus people injured. There were 251 people taken hostage. 48 still remain today, 2 years later. It's hard to process what it's like for those hostages, living in tunnels, stored underground, moved from place to place. Who knows what has happened to them? 2 years. For 2 years, Israel has said one simple thing: this war ends when Hamas, that terrorist organization, is not in charge of Gaza, because clearly they cannot be trusted, and when our hostages come home. For 2 years, this war has raged unnecessarily because a terrorist organization is determined to drive Jews out of Israel.
Senator James Langford, Republican from Oklahoma, on the Senate floor. White House's official schedule today has a meeting listed between President Donald Trump and Eden Alexander, an American Israeli taken hostage by Hamas 2 years ago and set free last May. Story from Reuters: opponents of Israel's actions in Gaza held protests on Tuesday in a number of cities on the second anniversary of the Hamas attack that triggered the war, despite denunciations by politicians who said such marches risked glorifying violence. Pro-Palestinian rallies were held on Tuesday in Sydney and in European cities including London, Paris, Geneva, Athens, Istanbul, and Stockholm. That from Reuters. U.S. Secretary of State Pete Hegseth spoke today at an enlistment ceremony at Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where over 60 men and women officially began their military careers. From a WTKR article, Defense Secretary Hegseth said he and President Trump have the backs of the recruits, and they'll have everything they need for training, gear, and facilities. He said this includes developing a barracks investment plan within the next 30 days.
One big, beautiful bill that President Trump championed, gave over $1 billion as the down payment in this effort. We are going to fix the barracks issue across all of our services. Because 2 years ago, the Government Accountability Office released a report. It said, quote, "Poor living conditions undermine quality of life and readiness." Despite that report, the Biden administration did nothing. It is simply unacceptable that in some cases our warriors continue to live in substandard housing. Every warfighter of our joint force deserves housing that is clean, comfortable, and safe. It's actually really simple. We can build a lot of beautiful things. Our commander-in-chief is a builder. He understands building, and building efficiently and well. Adequate housing for our force is critical to reviving the warrior ethos and rebuilding our military. Barracks are where warriors go to rest and recover. A place they go to mentally and physically prepare for winning the next fight. So the barracks task force that we're announcing will ensure that local and unit commanders are better empowered to take care of warriors. My office, the Office of the Secretary of War, will personally review and approve the resulting plan. In crucial ways, big and small, the Department of War is going to have your back like never before, not just in the fight, but alongside your family, alongside your welfare, the basics like barracks. You deserve the best. We can do a lot better than we've done in so many places, and we're going to invest in that.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at today's enlistment ceremony in Virginia Beach, Virginia at Naval Air Station Oceana. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, said in a press release she's concerned the Defense Department is offering privatized housing where service members in the past have had problems, from black mold to rodent infestations to damaged plumbing. She said DOD should move cautiously with this initiative and ensure that service members are protected from the abusive practices of private military housing providers. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word to get the stories making headlines in Washington. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.